In the forests surrounding Rostov-on-Don, something moved in the shadows. Between 1978 and 1990, over 50 people would enter these woods and never come out alive. The man responsible looked like your neighbor, your teacher, your friend. Andrei Chikatilo was the last person you'd suspect of being a monster. But for 12 years, he stalked the Soviet Union's railways and forests, becoming the country's most prolific serial killer. This is his story. He was a mild-mannered teacher by day, a quiet man with glasses, soft speech, and a forgettable face. To most, Andrei Chikatilo was just another man trying to survive Soviet life. But when the sun set, something darker woke inside him, a hunger that couldn't be satisfied by lesson plans or homework grades. For over a decade, police hunted a phantom who left behind bodies, young boys and girls, women and runaways mutilated in the forests near Rostov. He killed in silence. He blended in. And every time they got close, he slipped through their fingers like smoke, invisible, untouchable, until he wasn't. This is not a tale of madness. This is a tale of obsession, of compulsion, of a man who became the USSR's most prolific serial killer while pretending to be one of its model citizens. Andrei Chikatilo was born on October 16, 1936, in the village of Yablakin, in the middle of Stalin's famine-stricken Ukraine. The Holodomor Stalin's man-made famine had already killed millions. He grew up in extreme poverty, no toys, no books, just the cold and the endless hunger. Some nights, there was no food at all. He shared one bed with his mother, pressed together for warmth. His father was drafted into World War II when Andrei was just 5, but it was the whispered story about his older brother that would haunt him forever. Stepan had allegedly been kidnapped and eaten by starving neighbors during the famine. At school, young Andrei became a target. He was shy, clumsy, and physically weak. His chronic stuttering made reading aloud a humiliation. His bedwetting continued well into his teens. But it was something else that humiliated him most deeply, something he couldn't tell anyone. He couldn't perform sexually. Even as a teenager, this secret shame would fester inside him for decades. Ashamed of his own body and social failures, he buried himself in books. He idolized the Soviet Party and communist ideals. Education became his only escape from a world that seemed designed to crush him. He even tried joining the KGB in his 20s, imagining himself as a powerful state agent. But he was rejected. Just like every woman he ever pursued. Just like everything else he'd ever wanted. Eventually, through his sister's matchmaking, he married Feodosia Odnasheva in 1963. They had 2 children together. To the outside world, he was finally becoming normal. He found work as a school teacher in literature and Russian language. But even here, his failures followed him. Students mocked his stutter. Parents complained about his strange behavior. When students misbehaved or challenged his authority, rage boiled beneath his mild exterior. His sexual frustrations twisted into something darker, and slowly, very slowly, those urges began to spill out. December 22, 1978. Chikatilo was 42 years old when he committed his first known murder. By then, he'd been fired from his teaching job for inappropriate behavior with students. 9-year-old Lena Zakotnova was walking home from school when a kind man with glasses approached her. He offered her chewing gum, a rare treat in Soviet Russia. She followed him. He led her to an abandoned shack he'd purchased near the Gruesome River. What happened next would haunt investigators for decades. He attempted to assault her sexually, but couldn't perform. In his rage and humiliation, he stabbed the little girl multiple times. He mutilated her body with savage precision. Then he threw her corpse into the icy river. The Soviet police launched a massive investigation. They couldn't let the murder of a child go unsolved. but they were under pressure to find someone anyway. They arrested Alexander Kravchenko, a 25-year-old with a criminal record who lived nearby. Despite his claims of innocence, he was tortured into confessing. In 1979, he was executed by firing squad. Meanwhile, the real killer walked free. Chikatilo attended Kravchenko's trial. Sitting in the public gallery, he watched an innocent man die for his crime, and felt nothing. For 3 years, Chikatilo didn't kill again. Not because he felt guilt, he felt none. He was being careful, learning, planning, and when he was ready, the real horror would begin. By 1982, Chikatilo had perfected his method. He began targeting society's most vulnerable: runaways, hitchhikers, sex workers, and children. Anyone who wouldn't be missed immediately. His job as a supply clerk required him to travel frequently across the Soviet Union. He used this mobility to hunt. Train stations became his hunting grounds, anonymous places where strangers gathered. He always carried the same bag rope, a sharp knife, petroleum jelly, and newspapers to clean up the blood. He was methodical, prepared, patient. His methods were brutal and ritualistic. He would stab his victims dozens of times, often targeting the eyes, chest, and genitals. He believed that by destroying their eyes, they couldn't identify him in the afterlife. Some victims were found with body parts removed. Others had been mutilated beyond recognition. Forensic experts had never seen such savagery in the Soviet Union. He later told investigators that their fear, their dying struggles, gave him the sexual release he'd never been able to achieve normally. Death was his aphrodisiac. Most killings occurred in forests or remote railway embankments around Rostov. He knew these areas intimately, every path, every hiding spot, every escape route. His victims ranged from 7-year-old children to a 45-year-old woman. Gender didn't matter. Age didn't matter. He only cared that they were alone and vulnerable. With each kill, he grew more confident, more twisted. He began attending the funerals of some victims, standing among grieving families, watching their pain, feeding off their anguish. Local newspapers began calling him the Forest Maniac and the Rostov Ripper. But to everyone who knew him, Andrei Chikatilo remained just a quiet, forgettable man with glasses. By 1983, even the Soviet system could no longer ignore the pattern. 24 bodies had been found, all bearing similar wounds, all discovered near transport routes. But admitting a serial killer existed in the USSR was politically dangerous. Serial killing was supposed to be a capitalist disease, a product of Western decadence, not Soviet perfection. Detective Viktor Burakov was assigned to lead the investigation. He would spend the next 7 years of his life hunting this phantom, sacrificing his health, his family, and nearly his sanity. The task force grew to over 300 investigators. They studied every detailed wound patterns, geographical locations, timing. Slowly, a profile emerged of their killer. They determined he was likely educated, organized, and sexually He probably worked in a job that required travel. He was strong enough to overpower adults, but cowardly enough to target the vulnerable. They tried everything: psychological profiling, forensic analysis, massive They even used decoy officers to pose as potential victims. But each time, the killer seemed to sense their presence and vanish. Multiple times, Chikatilo was brought in for questioning. He had no criminal record. He was polite, soft-spoken, and completely forgettable. Each time, he was released. Meanwhile, the killing continued. By 1990, the body count had reached over 50. The investigation was becoming an international embarrassment for the Soviet Union. It wasn't until November 6, 1990, that investigators finally got their break. At a train station in Don Lesko's, An undercover officer noticed a man behaving strangely. Igor Rybakov watched as the suspicious man paced around the station. He was watching children, approaching women. His behavior set off every alarm bell. The man was well-dressed, wore glasses, and looked completely ordinary. But something about his movements, predatory, calculating, made Rybakov's skin crawl. When they searched Chikatilo's belongings, they found his killer's kitrope, knife, lubricant, and newspapers. After 12 years of hunting, they finally had their monster. At first, Chikatilo denied everything, but faced with mounting evidence and a skilled interrogator, he began to crack. On November 30th, 1990, he confessed to his first murder. Once he started talking, he couldn't stop. He confessed to 56 murders, providing details only the killer could know. Names, faces, locations. He remembered everything with chilling clarity. He spoke without emotion, describing each killing like a grocery list. Sometimes he smiled, sometimes he laughed, but never once did he show remorse. He told investigators he couldn't help himself. Each killing was like a drug release he couldn't achieve any other way. He didn't feel human unless he was taking life. Chikatilo's trial began on April 14, 1992. It became a media circus, with journalists from around the world descending on Rostov. He was kept in a metal cage inside the courtroom, literally caged like an animal to protect the public and court staff. He ranted, sang, exposed himself, and laughed at inappropriate moments. Families of victims watched in horror and rage as their loved one's killer performed for the cameras. Some shouted for immediate execution. The evidence was overwhelming. On October 15, 1992, Andrei Chikatilo was found guilty of 52 murders and sentenced to death. He spent 2 years on death row, showing no remorse. On February 14, 1994, Valentine's Day, he was led to a small room in a prison near Utak. A single bullet to the back of the head ended his reign of terror. Andrei Chikatilo left behind a legacy of unimaginable horror. 52 confirmed victims, dozens of families destroyed, a country forced to confront the monster that had hidden among them. Today, Rostov-on-Don has moved on, but the forests remember, and sometimes, in the darkest corners of the human mind, monsters like Chikatilo still walk among us. This was the story of the Butcher of Rostov, a reminder that evil doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it teaches your children, sometimes it sits next to you on the train, and sometimes it's already closer than you think. If you found this story gripping, subscribe to Utak Diaries for more true crime that cuts deep. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and stay watching.